No, not yet. No, we are recording. So, hello, everyone. Hello, Rebecca. Thank you for being here. Um, well, I think I'm going to start to kick off this conversation, and then maybe people are going to join uh, halfway through our conversation, and everybody is welcome. First of all, this conversation is being recorded, so don't say anything. No, I'm kidding. You can say anything, but if you know somebody who couldn't be here and would like to watch it, we are going to post it on our YouTube channel, on Fantástico Guia YouTube channel, so people will be able to watch it like later. If you are watching this later, hello. I'm Jana Bianchi. I think you already know me. And Diogo Ramos, my friend here. We are here to talk today with Rebecca Treasure, which is an author, an editor. I could, like, reading your bio, Rebecca, I could identify myself with you with like all the projects, many different projects and many different magazines. So I would like first to ask you to introduce yourself better and to talk a little bit about your experience in the market, and then we can start with your presentation. We are talking about flash fiction today, so for everybody who likes this very interesting format of writing, you are in the right place. So Rebecca.
Thank you. So hello, I'm Rebecca. I'm an editor at Apex Magazine and Book Company. I just started a microfiction market called Crepuscular Magazine, and I'm also an author. I've got short fiction published in a variety of places across the internet. But what we're really here to talk about is flash fiction, which I had done the microfiction contest through the Apex Magazine Patreon for almost 2 years, and I fell in love with the very short fiction. So that's under 250 words. Sometimes people say 300, but we had it at 250. And then we added the flash fiction to the magazine, and I've been doing the flash fiction for almost a year now over on the magazine side. And I just love short fiction. I think it's so powerful, and it requires such deft craft to do well because you have so little space. So I love talking about it and reading it. So.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yes, we also love like really short fiction. We have, I don't know if yes, you already know because we are like joining the themes, but in Fantástico Guia we also have like a flash fiction contest because we do believe it's a very interesting format for people to write and for people to read. So I think we're going to talk more about it. I think we talked a little bit about it in the social media, but we are going to start today. You have time to make questions to Rebecca. You can drop your questions in the chat if you want. But before, Rebecca is going to make like a presentation, around like half an hour of a presentation. Because you correct me if I'm wrong, Rebecca, but this is a workshop you teach, like a longer version of this workshop you teach. So I think you did like a shorter version for us to have like a first, if people don't know very well the format, or if people want to know more about the format, you'll be able to introduce people to flash fiction. Fiction.
So I teach a longer version of this class, more like a workshop, through the Reach Your Apex branch of Apex Magazine, where people send in their own flash fiction and we workshop them during the class, and it's about a 90-minute class. This is just like the shorter version of that, where I'm just going to be talking about like my approach as an editor and a writer to flash fiction. So various elements of flash fiction and microfiction, because a lot of the examples that I'm going to be sharing are from our microfiction contest. And so this is just kind of what we look for at Apex, what I'm looking for as an editor, and what I think about when I'm writing flash.
That's amazing. So maybe we could start with the presentation right now. Awesome. After we finish that, Diogo and I thought a little about like a couple of questions that could benefit people who write flash fiction here, so we can share all the experience that Rebecca has both writing and editing short fiction. So if you can share your screen,
I am figuring that out right now, and then I
No
will.
problem, no
Then
problem.
I will share my screen once I get it. There we go.
No problem. So let me just say hello to other people who joined a couple of minutes. Okay, so we are seeing your presentation.
Good. Okay. So yes, please. I have the chat right here on my screen. So if you have questions, or if I say something and it doesn't translate well and you want me to go back and re-explain it, or if I'm talking too fast, because sometimes when I get excited, I talk really fast, throw that in the chat and I will see it and do what is needed. I already introduced myself, so we are going to just dive right in. So the first thing that I start with flash fiction and micro, because of the nature of the contest at Apex, is theme, which I think works well because we're going to be sharing the themes. And so this is something that I think is going to be important to you guys as well. So the first thing that we think about when you're writing to theme is, does the story change if you remove that themed element from the piece? So we want the theme to be so much a part of the story that the story falls apart without it. And even if you're not writing to theme, it's good to think about what element of the story is so central that the story couldn't exist without it. Because quite often we can change the setting or we could change the character, but there's always something in a story that is what the story is really truly about. And we want to focus that and make sure that whatever that is really shining on the page. And when you're writing to theme, you really want the theme to be at least one of those things that can't be taken out of the story. I'm not going to click through to these links, but I wanted to share these two. These were the first two winners of the flash fiction contest, and they both did such brilliant things with theme. So very briefly, the Sagan Yee story, they wrote the story about a dissection of a soul after death. And it moves between very formal, almost clinical language and stream of consciousness language in slivers, like a dissection. And the stream of consciousness are flashes from the character's life. And so it plays with the theme in multiple ways and multiple layers. And obviously, you couldn't take the dissection out of that piece. It's absolutely integral to what the piece is doing. And then the Walking the Deep Down by Michelle Denham was for the Footsteps in the Forest theme, but it's actually set in a desert. And it's about this character going into the desert to take on a monster. And it acknowledges at the beginning, and I laughed when I read it in the slush pile, it says, everyone knows you don't bring a forest story into the desert, but I brought one anyway. And so instead of taking the theme literally and trying to, like, because that month we had a lot of stories that were literally characters walking through the forest, which it meant that became really familiar. And so to read a story that was different, yes, Sagan's story is amazing. So good. But when I read Michelle's story, because it did something different with the theme, it really stood out. But again, that forest story that the character takes into the desert was really important to the theme, and so it couldn't be taken out of it. So when you're writing to theme, you want to do something creative or unique or different with it. Don't take the first idea that you get, because a lot of other people may share that idea. Like we got a lot of Hansel and Gretel stories that month, and so it made it almost impossible for a Hansel and Gretel story to win, because I'd read 15 different versions of Hansel and Gretel by the time the judging was done. And so standing out in the slush pile is really helpful. And so the other thing that I tell that my first reading team and I talk about is if the use of theme is creative or unique or exceptional, which stresses me out as a writer. I'm like, what do you mean I have to be creative and exceptional? Like, no, I can't do that. But what makes my fiction different from anybody else's fiction is that I wrote it, right? So it's not that you need to be exceptional in the sense of like writing brilliant prose that nobody else could copy. It's that you bring yourself and your own experiences to the page and make sure that that's really singing on the page, and that you do something unique or different or challenging with the theme, that you're not taking the first idea you get and write out 10 ideas and cross off the first 5, right? And then only consider the second 5 as like the things where you really had to dig deep and think about, which forces you to dig into your experiences in your life to come up with ideas. So yeah, I said that. Even if you're not writing the theme, the heart of your story, the really the core of it is what the story is about. And with flash fiction, and especially with microfiction, if any of you write that, we don't have any room to meander. So you want to get rid of anything that isn't about that your story isn't about, so that everything on the page is supporting that theme and that story that you're telling. Click, maybe. No, you can't click anymore. There it goes. Okay. So the next thing that I talk about is perspective, which is going beyond first person or second person or third person. Those do matter. But what I really think about here is who is telling the story and what is unique about their perspective. So in the Sagan Yee story, half of the narrative is that clinical instructions and the other half is that stream of consciousness. And those are two very unique perspectives, and they are consistent in the usage throughout. This story, click, there we go, is Consummation by Anne Gresham. This isn't in the magazine. This is going to be over on the Apex magazine Patreon, but it's free to read for everybody if anybody wants to go check it out. And this is from the perspective of a forest fire. And I adore this story. The forest fire establishes the perspective and the character in the first sentence. And then throughout the story, the language and the descriptions feed and grow this perspective of a forest fire. So even a sentence that isn't about being a forest fire is clearly being told through a forest fire's perspective, if that makes sense. So everything in the story is feeding back on itself and reinforcing where the story is coming from, which makes the language more compelling, which makes it more immersive, which makes the story more powerful. The other thing that's important about having a clear and powerful perspective is that, like with a forest fire, almost everyone knows what a forest fire is. We know where they happen. We know the kind of stories and situations that happen in forest fires. And so the reader is instantly doing some of the world building work for the story, right? You don't have to tell them that there's horrible tragedies playing out. You don't have to describe that because we see it on the news, right? So your reader is reinforcing that by having a perspective that they can really dig into and is familiar. The reader is going to do something of that world building work on the page, which when you only have 1,000 words or 250 words, making the reader do some of the work for you is really, really powerful and helpful. So again, in the slush pile, what we want to make sure that we're seeing is there a clear and compelling perspective? So is it clear where the story is coming from? And is there something interesting about where that story is coming from? And then, like I said about the forest fire, you can always use the voice of your story to do some of that world building or character work for you to bring it off the page and into the reader's mind. So the next thing is setting, which with micro and flash, we run into a lot more like epistolary type stories like the Sagan Yee story. In more nebulous or intangible settings, there was a microfiction that was like a travel guide. So setting can be a little bit more nebulous or less clear when we're dealing with the short fiction, but we still can't ignore it entirely. Kind of like perspective, consider what is the context in which the story is taking place. So for the Yee story, it was some afterlife laboratory. Like I was saying about perspective, people kind of know what a laboratory looks like. And as long as the story doesn't violate what pictures the reader's calling up in their mind about a laboratory by giving some jarring detail, then again, the reader's doing that work for you and you don't have to do any of that. There's no description of where this is taking place in that story at all. But the reader fills it in their mind. There doesn't need to be because the context is clear to the reader. So this example piece is the music station. This is another micro on the Patreon by Amanda Seville. And the very first sentence sets up I almost want to click to this one just so I can read you guys the first sentence because it's so, so good. The songs come to my shop at night when the air cools and you can hear the highway breathe. And right there, we have such a powerful, I lost you guys. Can you guys still hear me? I just can't. You disappeared.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, I found you. I found you. There you are. Okay. Oh, good. I thought I'd lost you. So that sentence is so powerful and so beautiful, and you don't need to do any more work than that. You know where the story is taking place. We all know of highways. We can picture a highway, and so as the story goes on, the author brings in sensory details like describing candies, tabs and Twizzlers, ginger ale. So again, the story gives just enough potent detail to fill in the edges, and then the reader's mind does the rest of the work. We fill in our own favorite candies and sodas as we're reading it. The risk, of course, is if you give too many details, or if you give a jarring detail or a detail that the reader is unfamiliar with, then it's going to pull them out of the story. So it's kind of a risk, but you're walking a line trying to immerse your reader and make their mind do some of the work for you, and sometimes that just doesn't pay off as well as we want it to. Regardless of whether it's a place, if your setting is, or the context of the piece is clear to the reader, that's what's important, and they're going to start doing that work for you. The other thing is evocative. It doesn't have to be Paris or, you know, the top of a mountain or the beach, but we've all read stories that make, you know, a barn an evocative setting because of the smells and the sounds of the animals and the nostalgia of the character. And so making the setting come off the page in some way, is it horrifying or enticing or nostalgic or disturbing, elicits some kind of emotional response. We all have emotional responses to the places and the context that we're in all of the time. And so having the reader, again, respond to your piece emotionally, to the setting emotionally, makes it more real for them and makes your story more powerful. Evocative language can be useful to enrich a piece. And that's where I will often overwrite and pour everything I can think of onto the page, and then cut back to only the most powerful things on the page. And the last thing, and this is something that I as an editor really, really like, and I love to see, and it's something that I'm often calling out when I'm doing critiques or edits for people. I'm like, use sensory details. What does it smell like? Where is the light coming from? What are the shadows short or are the shadows long? What is the temperature in the room? Is it cold? Is it humid? Because those things impact how we feel, how we think, how we interact with our environment. And then overwriting again. So write down what, you know, all 5 senses and more, because we have, you know, the vestibular system. Are they dizzy? Is it unstable, like on a ship? What does that feel like? And then cut down to only the ones that are reinforcing your theme, helping your perspective, enriching your setting. But sensory details are something that are really useful. The next thing is plot, which is a big challenge for the smaller stories. A lot of the rejections that we send are because either the story is really just a vignette, a snapshot, or because it's trying to do too much with the space that's allowed. This actually got worse when we moved up to Flash, which surprised me, because I think it's because with microfiction, you don't have any room to wander into the woods, right? You have to get everything on the page to try to communicate a story in 250 words. But with 4.5 pages, you can wander a little bit, and when you wander, you can get lost. And so if you're writing 1,000 words, you still need to make sure that the plot is clear to the reader. Something that might be helpful if this is something that you recognize in yourself is treat even 1,000 words, even 8,000 words, as if you only had 250 words to tell the story. Again, what is the one thing that is absolutely integral, that cannot be taken out of this piece, and then make sure every single line on the page is supporting that and reinforcing that. This example is Over My Bones by Dana Vickerson, another of the microfictions. This is one of my favorite microfiction pieces because it does something that I could teach like a whole class on, and I could just nerd out about for like hours. And that is that the manuscript is not the story. The words that Dana delivers on the page in this story are beautiful and poetic and resonant, but taken on their own, it's just a snapshot. It's just a vignette of this body decomposing in the woods. But with just a few phrases and words that Dana uses, she uses words like hidden and the man never returned and my ruined body. And with these very quick, like even if you haven't read the story, you kind of know the story just from those 3 lines, right? You already kind of, and the title. And so the story, the plot is happening in your mind, and Dana can spend all of her words on this beautiful vignette, just hinting at what actually happened. So she did not write the whole story, but she told us a whole story. And that's something that's really, really powerful, and that microfiction can do so beautifully, and that I get super excited about, is making the story happen in my mind instead of actually telling it to me on the page. So when you think about these pieces, whether there's a complete story on the page or not, there does need to be a complete story. Another thing that we see quite often, especially with the Flash, is pacing issues. Usually too much time spent on something, which would usually be the world building or description, or not enough time given to something, and that's usually character motivation and goals. So if you're heavy on world building and light on character motivation, maybe try to swap those around a little bit. But if you take one thing from everything that I say, like this idea of the manuscript not being the story, like I said, it's like makes my nerdy little writer heart sing. But I think it's a really powerful thing to think about, is how much of the work can you make the reader do? And then you can use your words on your page to reinforce what's happening in the reader's mind, instead of having to waste words on the page making it happen in the reader's mind. So implication and subtlety and all of that. So from plot, we get into endings, which is another frequent cause for rejections. Even in the longer slush pile, a frequent reason for rejection is that the ending doesn't work. It doesn't pay off. So when you look at your ending, I like to think about the premise of my story. What is the story about? Who is the character? What did they want at the beginning? And then the promise that I made to the reader at the beginning about that premise, like where is this character going? What am I telling the reader that the story is about in the opening pages? What does the title signify about where the story is going? What kind of story it's going to be? And then did I pay off on all of those things? Do I deliver on all these promises that I made to the reader at the beginning of the story? This is something I struggled with for a really long time. I'm really good at writing openings and hooks and beautiful settings, and I get you really invested in my characters, and then I get to the end and I'm like, and they rode into the sunset happily. I don't. And what really changed for me was when I started writing the ending first. I'm like a pantser. I can't plot. I think it's witchcraft. But if I write the ending first, then I know where I'm going the whole time. And I can't wander off into the woods going somewhere else. I can't bring in irrelevant details. And another thing that I started doing is that I will title my document by what emotions I want the piece to be, or kind of like the theme or the vibe that I want the piece to have, so that the whole time I'm writing, that's right up there on the top, and it helps me stay on the path that I set out for myself instead of wandering off being creative. This story, The Nightingale, the Lark, and the Spider Queen by Kai Delmas, is a beautiful example of a surprising but inevitable ending. And I gasped a lot when I got to the end, because what it seems to be is Kai's telling us a story from the Spider Queen's perspective about this nightingale and the lark being in love with each other. And then at the end, she eats them. And he never lies to us. He never violates. He never doesn't deceive us, because you can't lie to your readers any more than the characters lie to your readers. He warns us how it's going to end. The Spider Queen is consistent in describing where she's going, but he deceives us in the sense of kind of lulling us into this complacency with this trope of a happy ending for love stories. We want the nightingale and the lark to fall in love and be together. And so when you get to the end, you're like, oh, well, of course she's going to eat them. She's the Spider Queen. But it's surprising, even in 250 words, he lulls you into the sense of complacency. So if you can get a surprising ending, that's a lot of fun for the readers. It's really challenging to do in the short space that these have. Twist endings work best if the reader could have, or maybe should have, seen it coming, because you want that surprising but inevitable kind of feeling to it. Another way to end your story is like the open-ended story, and I'm not really the editor for open-ended stories. I do acknowledge that they can work, particularly if the reader is drawn into that open ending with some kind of choice or moral quandary, and leave that reader sitting with, but of course they're going to push the red button, but they don't know if the character pushed the red button. So you leave that conflict again in the reader's mind and make the reader end the story for you, but you leave them kind of dissatisfied, which can be very powerful. Full circle endings are another way to end, where you kind of come back to the beginning of the story, but with a twist, but they risk being predictable. So again, some like misleading your readers, or kind of hinting that something else might happen, so that the ending feels a little bit less predictable. It can be more satisfying for the reader. Nope, sorry, I should have clicked faster. That says that. Okay. From endings, go back to beginnings, and not just the first sentence, which is important, but your title really, really makes a difference. Because when you tell people about, as well, I can't remember titles to save my life, but usually people tell me titles. I'm like, you know, the story with the girl in it with the dog, that one. But most of the time, what people remember, they remember the title of stories, right? They tell you about where oaken hearts do gather, whatever it may be. The title is what is memorable. And it's part of that premise and promise that you have for your reader. Use that to your advantage, like the Sagan story, which was even longer when I got it in the slush pile, and I had them cut it down because it had like 3 or 4 more words in it when we got it. It's like the longest title ever. But with flash fiction and microfiction, that's brilliant. Yeah, use that space to make the to do more of the work for you, since you have so little on the page. So usually I use titles sent in, but instead I wanted to talk about these. So this is the question that I gave to my first readers. Does it evoke a question or an image or some kind of mood? Does the first line then deliver on that and follow clearly from that title? And does it compel the readers to read the second sentence and the third sentence and so on? So Over My Bones tells you everything that you need to know about the character right there. We know from the title that the character is dead. And so that piece of world building, boom, out of the way. And Dana, again, can just use her words, her beautiful lyrical words to do more than explain what's going on. Experimental protocol for the coronal sectioning and assessment of a human soul. It's so clearly on theme, and it does a lot of that world building work again up front with the title. Another thing with the consummation story, which is the forest fire story, consummation is something that we associate with sex, that we associate with fulfillment. And so then twisting that into a forest fire kind of story makes you kind of reflect on it differently. I couldn't find a good example for this, but another thing that a title can do is it can have a different meaning at the end of the story than it had at the beginning of the story. And that's a lot of fun to have too. And they can also just be poetic. I also want to kind of like asterisk this and say, don't over stress about titles. They can be great parts of your story, but you know, calling it the snowman is also perfectly acceptable. And if the story is good, the title is literally irrelevant. It can just be like a little bit of extra fairy dust. So what did sorry, I couldn't remember why I was going to say that, but I'm going to say it anyway. So it says editors and first readers are always looking for a reason to reject, right? So that's the job of my slush team, is to narrow down the 150 stories we get to the 30 that I'm going to read. My job is to find the one story that fits what Apex is looking for, that's going to satisfy our readers. That's my job as an editor. My job as a writer is to make sure that first readers and editors can't say no to my story. So you don't ever want to give them a reason to say no to the story. And then I don't think this is the second to last thing, but it's super important. And I think something that writers overlook or maybe undervalue when sending pieces out to markets. And that's because when I'm reading for Apex, I can't just consider my preferences, although obviously Jason and Leslie trust me and have put me in a position where my preferences matter. But I also have to consider what kind of stories Leslie likes to publish. I need to consider what our readers like to read. It's not just about my opinion. It's about what Apex is publishing and looking for. So if a story doesn't belong alongside the stories that Apex readers expect and want, it doesn't matter how good it is. You could send me the most beautiful romance story ever written and I would reject it because it isn't what we're looking for. Right? You could send me the best hard science fiction, but without any emotion in it, and like, sorry, this is great sci-fi. I might even say that in the rejection, but if it doesn't fit what Apex looking for, it's not going to make it onto into the magazine. This story, Crimson Clover, is, content warning, like it is a bleak, dark story. And I read it like this. I was like, when I first read it, it was just horror, like coursing. It's so good. So read it, but when you're in a good place emotionally. Not only does she manage to tell the whole story on the page, but this hits everything that Apex is looking for. It is strange, it is surreal, it is shocking, and it is beautiful. And those 4 things are kind of like the TLDR of what Apex is looking for. And if you can check all of those boxes, you're really going to do well in the slush pile. If you can check 2 of the 4, you're going to be, considered able to go into the magazine. If you can't check any of those boxes, then we're starting to go, this just doesn't fit what we're looking for. It really doesn't matter how good your story is if it isn't what I'm going to publish for Apex. So that means that in order to get published, we need to be reading the markets that we're submitting to, which is almost impossible to do entirely, right? I cannot read all of the markets I'm submitting to. It's impossible. But I try to read a smattering of stories from the markets that I'm submitting to. I try to read, once a month, I'll try to read 1 BCS story and 1 Clarksworth story and 1 Podcastle story and one, escape pod story. So kind of trying to grab bag and make sure that you kind of have a feel for what they're looking for. It's not necessary, but it's going to increase your chances because you're going to know how to write to these places that you want to be published in. The most common reason for rejection, of course, is treatment. And it's often for my slush readers a very non-specific, the writing isn't quite there. We don't reject for typos unless it's riddled with typos, and we don't reject for grammar or punctuation. As this meeting shows, not everyone speaks English as their first language, and not everyone who speaks English as their first language speaks English the same way. So I'm never going to reject because of sentence structure or anything like that. But it's more developmental type things where the descriptions are too long or they're not long enough, or the dialogue is unnatural and or stilted, or a structure or a perspective that doesn't make sense for the piece being told. Like quite often I'll see a second person story, and I love second person, but if it doesn't make sense for the story being told, I'm like, why did you make that choice? And that's a treatment issue. Like it's a craft thing. Like, why did you put this in second person? So because of the short timeline and because the Apex Flash Fiction is a contest, the more polished stories are going to be the ones that win out in the end. Recently, we had a story that was my favorite as far as just like concept in the stack. It did something really brilliant with the theme. It was super creative. It was a lot of fun to read, but I had to reread it 2 or 3 times to understand the in-world terms that the writer had invented for this story. And so it was confusing. And so as much as I loved it and I wanted to pick it, it would have had to go through multiple rounds of editing to get it to a point where it was clear for the readers on the page. And so I had to return it to the writer. Unfortunately, I told them that I loved it, and I told them I was just too confused by these in-world terms, contextually, and maybe if you polish that, and I hope it finds a home because it was a really brilliant story. That's it. That's me. You can find me on Twitter or Blue Sky or visit my website. And I came in at 29:23, so right at 30 minutes, which is very exciting. And that's it. Thank you.
It was great, Rebecca. Thank you very much for that.
You are so welcome. I hope that was helpful.
Amazing. Very, very good.
I was just trusted about some of the questions I would ask. It's all being answered.
Oh, good.
One good thing also is that we have a couple of people here who are in our writing group.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have talked a little bit about many of those subjects, and you kind of reinforced them, and I was just, yay!
Yeah.
You should listen to Rebecca because, yes, very, very, very nice. Since the beginning, when you're talking about like not choosing the first idea, we made a lot of exercises we have like listened to the Writing Excuses podcast where they talk about the low-hanging fruits.
Yep.
So it's like, we used to, pick those fruits for in the low-hanging fruit. And also we had a very, very interesting exercise with our writing group where we started writing the last paragraph of a story without like having the idea of what we wanted to write. That was interesting too. So amazing. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
For who arrived a little bit like later than the beginning, Rebecca taught us, like shared very kindly this overview about flash fiction. And now we have about like 1 hour to talk to Rebecca. We did like a list of questions and topics that we want to cover, but please feel free to use the chat to drop your additional questions or comments about what Rebecca already said. Also, in the beginning, we are trying to open like for a Q&A round, and also feel free to open your mic or camera to ask, but let's start with those topics that we listed to talk about. Feel free to interact in the chat, right? Diogo, do you want to start, please?
I can, definitely. Rebecca, we are very curious. We'd like to know about what's going on behind the scenes. So can you tell us about the steps flash fictions go through after being submitted?
So during the month after of the reading period, right? So the open reading period is the 7th of the month to the last day of the month. And you guys, so Brazil is fairly far, so you guys might even be able to get like a little bit like 1, 2 in the morning on the first day of the month, because I don't close it until I get up on the first day of the month. So because of the west coast of the US and all the way into Alaska and such. So during that month, my first reading team is going through, and what happens is that they put comments on the stories. So they either do like a plus or a minus, and they say, yes, I think the story needs to be read by Rebecca, or no, I think that this one needs to be returned to the writer. And we ask that at least two readers read each story. And if they disagree, that a third reader reads the story. So that way it's not just one person making this decision. We get multiple perspectives and reads on it. And that way we're trying to make sure that if there's something that just doesn't resonate for one person, it isn't just their problem. It really is something that the story just isn't working. And then once we close sometime in that first week, I try to get to it as quickly as I can. I go in and I return all of the stories that have 2 minuses on them. And then I go through and I start reading the stories that have the pluses on them. And sometimes I read them and I return it to the writer because I just know that it's not going to work for me. Quite often I save it for later because I'm like, that one's close and I want to reread it. And by the end of that time period, I usually have anywhere between 10 to 15 stories. One month we got almost 200, and I think I ended up with 15 in my second stack. But usually it's closer to 10. I end up reading and I return most of them, and I end up with, a smaller stack. And then those stories I go in and I read again. And sometimes I read these stories a lot of times because they're like this. I don't know if any of you guys submitted to the necromancy theme that just closed, but the last 5 stories were just so good. I was like crying in the chat to my team, like, I can't pick. These are too good. And what I actually ended up doing, which is just a little bit of insider knowledge, is that the 2 of the 3 finals I actually just sent to Leslie Connor to be considered to be published in the magazine itself, because they were too good to let go. I couldn't put all 3 in for necromancy, but they were too good. And I emailed the authors and asked for permission to send them over to Leslie. So those are still under consideration at the magazine. That doesn't happen very often, but when a story is too apexy and too beautiful, like, oh my gosh, these stories, I'm still thinking about them. I'll never get over it. They were so good, but that's basically the process. And then once I finally get it down to 1, I send the acceptance and return the rest of the stories.
Amazing. And how about making final decisions?
Let's
How does it work? Oh, okay.
Before we start that, let me
Go
just say something to who is watching here. Rebecca said that like the submission period opens on the 7th of the month. But if you are a subscriber on their Patreon,
Yes.
you have additional week, the first week of the month. So I'm going to share here the Patreon link.
She's doing my job better than I am.
No,
I should have said that.
It's just because I am a supporter. We're here. It's because I am a supporter, and it's very nice because you can also vote on the theme. And for you are going to see Patreon is in dollars. However, they have, I don't know how it works, but I think that the tier that I support is like less than 8 reais. So it's a very reasonable amount, because sometimes due to the exchange rate, like anything in dollar is like too high. But I don't know why the Patreon has this real option, which is pretty okay for us to support. So if people like Apex, like depends on the submission on the subscriptions to have like money to pay the authors and etc. So if you want to have this extra week, if you want to know more, read all the texts or the short flash fictions that are chosen, you can support Apex. I just dropped the link here.
Thank you.
Diogo, go ahead. Sorry.
No. I was just asking Rebecca about the final decisions, how to make them, because we know it's quite difficult as editors. Also, we know that sometimes like we have 5-10 stories which are like amazing. So how does it work for you?
I cry a lot. Like I said, this last month, I just was blown away by the quality of the final stack. They were just such incredibly beautiful and incredibly told pieces. It kind of depends on the month. Some months it's really easy. I know when I read a story, or I have a gut feeling when I read a story, I'm like, yep, this is the one. This is gonna, and I'm right. But as an editor, and you'll probably understand this, I'm always hoping for one to be even better than that. I'm hoping for one to come in like, oh no, this is the one, right? And that happened with the necromancy theme. But what I'm looking for and what I think about when I'm making the final decision is all of those things that I just talked about, right? I make sure is the perspective clear, is the setting rich, is the characters, is the perspective of the character enriching the story, is the theme interesting, is it apexy? Does it fit what I'm looking for? Sometimes if I'm having a hard time, I also do copy edits for the forthcoming issues. And so I have a good sense of what's going to be published. And so if a piece would really not jive with the kind of the feel or the mood of an upcoming issue, then that might be a swaying factor. If I'm down to 2, then the one that's going to really reinforce what that issue, the story, the mood that the issue is delivering, that can make a difference too. But you kind of bumble your way through it, because sometimes they're really good and you just have to make a decision at the end of the day. And so you start nitpicking at that level, because you have to. I have to pick one story every month. I can't usually cheat and take 3. And so, yeah, you look for all of the craft things and the most creative story and the one that sings to me, because at the end of the day, the decision's been put in my hands. And when I first started, I was like, I can't choose. Who am I? I'm just some idiot from the internet. But Jason and Leslie, trust me to make that decision. So at the end of the day, I have to.
Yeah. And it's funny because people tend to think that the best story is the winner. The best story is the one that gets selected, but it's not like that.
It's not that all, right? Not that simple. Yeah.
It's hard to say like that the story is best. It's even strange to this definition.
Yeah.
And I was remembering like the first month when we opened for the submissions, we were like, we had 3 stories that we loved so much and they were like amazing, and we were like, oh my god, we started to make like pros and cons, and we were like, actually pros and less pros, because they were amazing. And then at the end we were like, no, let's ask for help. We like called 2 friends of us who are also writers, editors, and we told them, just help us, please. Make your comments about those 2 stories. And then we like, But,
with the microfiction contest, a few times I anonymized the stories and sent them to Marissa Van Uden, who's a coworker at Apex with me, because I was like, I can't pick. I love all of these. You have to pick because I can't do this. I haven't had to do that with the flash fiction. But yeah, and what, I'm sorry if I say your name wrong, Leticia said in the chat is absolutely true. Like a story that I absolutely love, you know, another editor may reject out of hand. And a story that I don't understand, another editor may absolutely fall in love with it. And so a rejection is never, ever a commentary on the quality of the story. Quality is such a odd thing to talk about with art. So, because it's so subjective, so.
And let's talk a little bit about the path to publication. Once we got an acceptance, what happens afterwards?
Yeah, so I send the acceptance to the writer, and then I have to send the contract over to Leslie Connor, who executes all our contracts. Once the contract is signed, I'll usually have a few light copy edits or maybe a developmental editor too. Just usually it's almost always for clarity, because I want to make sure that the story is coming through clearly, or I want to reinforce an emotional point sometimes with the writer. But it's very important to me as an editor, even when I'm doing like freelance editing, that again, subjectivity, right? It's my take on it. And if I always tell the writer, like, please feel free to tell me no, and no, don't take my edits. You know, if you don't like the comma, don't take the comma. If you don't want to reinforce that point and you think it's well made, say I'm good here. Like, it's not my job to change the piece. It's just if the writer agrees with my perspective, then they can take it as an opinion, right? But I'm not a dictator. I think that there's maybe a generational thing where older editors kind of can trend toward being a little bit like, my word is law and I'm the god of the magazine. And I find that kind of odd, and I do not see it that way at all. But there is an editing process, and then on the 20th of each month, the winning story gets published on our Patreon, exclusive for patrons, so that they get to read them a couple of months early, and then it comes out in a forthcoming issue of the magazine alongside everybody else. So.
Mm-hmm. And and what would you say are the main differences between the contest, path to publication, and Apex regular submissions?
How quickly you get a response.
Okay.
With Apex, the main / we really strive and are actually expanding our reading team currently to make sure that we get first responses back in 30 days, right? We understand that this is a business as much as it is an art, and people want to, if we're not going to take their story, they want to send it out to find another editor who does love it. And so we try to keep our first responses within 30 days. But if your story gets held, it's just Leslie on that side reading the submissions. And so it can take her some time to work through that second stack, 3-4 months sometimes. She tries really hard, but she's extraordinarily busy as the editor-in-chief of Apex. And so but with flash fiction, you always get your story back within 30 days, because we are, started a new contest immediately. The second it closes, we're open for the next contest. And so that's probably the biggest thing, because like I said, even with the flash, if I fall in love with a piece and I can't take it for the contest, I can send it to Leslie to be considered to be published in the magazine. The other big difference, of course, is that the contest is themed.
Yeah, it's very nice to hear like the process after the story is chosen, because we are always talking about, before having a Fantástico Dia contest, we both Diogo and I, we had like magazines, we had different magazines, then we worked together in a special issue of both magazines together. And in the 3 cases, we are very focused on giving people a view of like a very complete process of publication, because I think we are a little behind in terms of like timeline of like the professionalization of the market. Okay. So I think that many people still think that, oh, my story, if my story is chosen, it's perfect, and it's just copy and paste and it's amazing, let's go and pay me and it's over. Yeah. And we try to, like kind of educate people in a way that, okay, your story is amazing. We chose that because we love it, but there's still things to be done. There's a contract that needs to be signed. It's not, okay, your story is amazing, give it to me, and that's over. And I like to hear you talking about that, because here in Fantástico Dia, we are trying to share our experiences and invite people to try to enter in the anglophone market too. We are going to talk more about Brazilians in the anglophone market, because this is something that's very dear to us. But I think that like having this listening, that how that work in such a important magazines such as Apex, both in the contest and in the regular submission, I think it's very nice to know that this is how it works, So we are kind of showing us when you send things for us in the Fantástico Guia contest, and if you're chosen, if you go through all the process, you are kind of like seeing how it works in a anglophone market, also a pro market, So it's very nice to hear. Right, Diogo? Do you have any point about that?
Definitely. No, I'm eager to ask Rebecca about rewrite requests. If it's a thing, also when you're, of course, not talking about the contest, but Apex regular window, how do you feel about that as an editor and also as a writer?
Do you want before that to tell people what it means to be because maybe
okay,
not...
go ahead.
To do what a rewrite request is?
Yeah.
Yes, I think many people don't know what it is. And then...
Okay, so very occasionally, I'll do both at the same time. Leslie will find a story in the slush pile that she loves, but that maybe isn't clear in the opening, or the ending is close, but it's not quite there, but it's close, and she feels like she can tell the writer exactly what she wants from it. And that's really important. And in those cases, if she feels like she can communicate what she wants exactly to the writer and loves the rest of the piece, she will send a rewrite request to the author, giving them the opportunity to rewrite the story based on her feedback and resubmit. Usually, if we reject a story, we don't want to see it again, because otherwise people would just rewrite and retool and try to submit. But in very special cases, when Leslie can give very specific feedback, then she will send that. But it's only if she feels like that she can communicate to them exactly what she's looking for, so that it's fair, right? So she's not like, I love this, but it's just not quite working for me, try again. It's never going to be like that. It's very specifically like, the first 4 pages don't do anything for me. Can you cut them and rework from there and then send it back to me? And in those cases, when you resubmit, you kind of skip to the head of the queue. You're already being held. You don't have to go through the first readers again. And so that you're already back on Leslie's desk. But it doesn't happen very often, partially because she's busy, partially because we get a lot of good stories. And so we're not hurting for content, and partially because it's that case where she has to know exactly what to say to send that request.
Yeah, that's amazing. So for everybody here, it's like it's not a rejection. It's like an email that says, look, I like your story. It's not an exception also. So it can be a little bit, I wouldn't say frustrating, but it's actually very exciting. But also it's not a promise. This is very important. So it's not like, oh, you work and I'm for sure buy your story. This is not how it works. It's like, rewrite and we can see if that works. So I think it's interesting because even though it's like that it doesn't happen all the time, I think it can be a little bit confusing for those who are not, familiar to how it works. So it's nice to hear how you say. And I think this is a very, talking like as an editor, I think this is a very careful thing to do, because as I said, it's like you kind of talk about like expectations and talk about, like, even though it's not a promise, it's kind of, the
hope is real. Yeah, lots of hope. Yeah, and hope is what kills us, right? Hope is the bad thing as writers.
Yes.
So yeah,
and it's like, I feel that when you are in the submission market, when you start to get like personal rejections or second tier rejections and things like that, in the beginning, it's very exciting, but also it becomes a little bit frustrating. It's a very good thing because you are almost there, but I think that you start to feel like, oh no, but I was almost there. What was wrong?
It's almost worse.
Yes, it's almost worse. Yes, it's almost worse. Or when you're hold for a long time and then you get a rejection, you're like, oh no, I was almost there.
It's heartbreaking. So, yes.
Yeah, that's the word. Yes. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah,
it's very nice to hear, like, talking as an editor. And for everyone who is submitting to Apex, know that this may be alternative. Talking about that, I would like, we kind of like selected some questions here about like Brazilian writers sending things to Apex. As I said, I think we are a little bit later in the timeline in terms of like submitting things to the anglófono world. Of course, we are talking about people who don't have English as a first language or a native language, which is a great barrier, and I think we can talk about it a little bit. But can you like feel? I know that you don't have like access to. I don't know. I suppose that you don't have access to all the statistics and details about that. But do you feel that people from Brazil are sending more stories, or like? Do you like see more people talking about it from Brazil, etc., or it's not perceptible yet?
I don't like you said, I don't have access to any of that data. I might even be able to pull it up. I don't know if Moksha keeps track of all of that, but I will say that I know that we get a lot of international submissions, and that Leslie loves to see those stories in our slush pile. She gets really excited when she can tell a story that maybe isn't as familiar to our readers, and to the common readers. Now, I'm not seeing an easy way to pull that up.
No,
but you said I was going to be invited to the Discord, so I can ask and we can see if I can get that information for you. I know that you said that you have had people submitting to the flash fiction contest, which is super exciting. But another thing about the way that I particularly read Slush, and the way that I guide my flash fiction team to read Slush, is that we don't really look at the cover letters, and we try not to think too much about the author when we're reading the stories. We're just reading the stories, and that's what's important. It doesn't matter to me where the author is from or who they are, until I've read the story, right? And then the person, of course, is important because they're part of that story, but we're not looking at the cover letters initially. So it's not even something that's really on my radar, because I don't even read the cover letters most of the time. So
yeah, that's a good information also, because we're talking about like cover letter when you're writing group also, and people sometimes get, oh my God, but what do you put in the cover letter? Sometimes it's just for add something in the end to see, oh, this people like, is this an experience that this people is like living or something like that? So this is a good take.
Yes, we were actually considering adding a box for like story info like that, because so few of our first readers read the cover letters. But for content warnings, or for like, this story is about microbiology and I am a microbiologist, like that's relevant information. But if you're not reading the cover letter, then we're not getting that. So we've been actually considering adding like an optional, like, is there anything that you want the readers to know about your story ahead of time kind of box, for that very reason, because sometimes it is relevant, right? So
okay, so just talking about first readers, we have a question from Leticia. She sent us yesterday, and she'd like to know, what are the challenges of managing a team of first readers?
I don't know. I got really lucky. My team is really awesome, and I love them. We have a chat in Discord, and we just spend a lot of time talking about the stories. There's like a really bizarre one because it's Apex, so we get some really strange stories sometimes. Our very first month, we had the story where this guy was cutting up a fish in his kitchen, and it got really, really strange. And so, of course, like the reader was like, everybody needs to read this right now. And we all, talked about it, and we're like, what is this story? Like, what even is this story? And so I think that it's really important that to make sure that it's not just read story, give opinion, go home, that we're creating a community around it, and talking about the stories and talking about the kind of things that I'm looking for. I will quite often drop into the chat and be like, I picked the swinning story because of X, Y, and Z. This is what I loved about it. Or, Kai, I saw that you loved this story, but I rejected it because the character didn't come to life for me, or whatever. And so it's just a matter of trying to communicate and keep that channel going both ways. I'm always like, if you have something that you think I need to understand about a story, tell me. I'm really not into like I said, editorial like superiority. I think that's nonsense. So it's just kind of keeping the dialogue open, I guess.
That's amazing because it's like a way of also sharing our experience and like teaching. I'm using commons because it's like you're saying, I'm not like in a position to teach anybody, but at the same time you have your experience and you can show people how you work and how you like, been doing. And also I would like to tell people here that this is a very, very interesting experience to have as a writer, to be a slush reader, to be, because sometimes to be an editor you need to have a place, you need to have an experience, and maybe be a slush reader is like the first kind of step to having these contacts with different stories, with people trying different things. You have the experience to see the backstage of magazine. We are going to use like readers in the next month, so this is very interesting information for us also, because yes, it's like maybe the dynamics of things are going to change a little bit and for better, I think. So this is very nice to know about. And I would tell people that if you have this opportunity of being a slush reader, both in Brazilian venues and in anglophone venues, I think this is very nice. Also, being a Brazilian slush reading for anglophone market is a very good opportunity to have like a different take, a different bias, right, towards stories that are being received. And I like this idea, So you were like looking for slush readers very recently, right?
Yeah, we just closed the window yesterday. However, if anybody here is interested in reading, you can send me an application. I'll drop my email
this is
in the
not
chat.
because Leticia sent us another question, and the question is, what do you look for in new readers who want to join your team? So this is exactly.
So make sure to put Fantastico Guia in the subjects, because I was technically closed the window because I got a lot. But I would love to get some Brazilian readers, like you said, because I want to make sure that if we're getting stories from Brazil, that they're able to be read by people who might have a better understanding of them than I would and can help me understand them if I need to. So put Fantastico Guia and I will definitely consider it. As for what I consider, like I said, I think I got 65 so far applications, and we are not taking 65 new readers, unfortunately. As much as I wish we could, that's just not possible. And so what I asked them, and what I will ask anybody who sends me an email to do, is to tell me about your favorite Apex story and tell me what you think makes a story an Apex story. And this is not like a pass or fail. I'm looking for kind of an understanding of story. So how much, because we're going to be doing mentorships with the new readers. So if you've never read for anywhere before, you might have like a slightly longer mentorship. But I kind of want to see like what kind of things that they're noticing about the story, like what kind of things they're talking about. And then if they understand what an Apex story is, the way that Leslie and Jason and I kind of understand what an Apex story is. And that's, like I said, this is not a pass or fail, although it probably feels kind of intimidating. It's just so that I can get an understanding of, is this person, do they need to read a little bit more of what we're doing to really understand what Apex is looking for and what we're after, or do they really already get it? And I could just be like, go read, you don't need any mentorship. And so it's just kind of to help me to get to understand the reader's kind of craft level where they are and how they understand Apex. And then the mentorship, what quite often happens with new readers is that they're hesitant to reject. And so they get a story that they like a little bit and they'll send it to Leslie. And so we're trying this mentorship thing too, because the mentors will be reading anything that the new reader wants to send to Leslie. The mentor is going to read that story first and be like, okay, well, this is great, but we're not going to send it to Leslie because of X, Y, or Z. And hopefully that helps the new reader kind of hone their ability to say no, which is hard. And it's the worst part of being an editor. No, I don't like sending rejections. I don't like telling people no, because when I get a rejection, I know how much that sucks. But at the same time, like I was saying in the class, that's my job. too. And so it's kind of like, but we want to make sure that we're doing it intentionally, and we want to make sure that when we're passing something up, it's not going to be something that Leslie reads and goes, why did I read this? Like, I have 50,000 other things I should be doing. She doesn't have time to read stories, even if they're good. But, you know, if you're saying this is really good, but it's probably not, doesn't need to end up on Leslie's desk.
Wow, just this mentorship, I think it's word of, like, you know, having this trying to be English reader either in Apex or in any other place. I think it's both Diogo and I, we can say that we have learned a lot reading Slush. I wouldn't even say Slush, because we, for our magazines, we would read everything, because also the amount of stories is like a little bit smaller than the Anglophone market. But we learned a lot, and it's influenced, like, both in our career as editors, but also as writers. So this is a good thing. And I don't know if it makes sense, but I feel that, like, most of the Slush readers are also writers. Is that correct? I don't know if you...
Almost universally. Not we do have one Slush reader who is not really a writer, but I think you scratch pretty much any editor and you're going to find a writer underneath. Yeah, that's what brings most of us to the table. But yeah, I really, even if you can't read for Apex, or if I get your application and I'm not able to bring you onto the team, finding opportunities to Slush read, I think it's really, really good for developing not just craft, but also an understanding of this hard fact that's so hard for writers, that it's not personal. Right? Yes. It's not about you. It's not about your story. It's that there's 15 other stories in the slush pile, and your opening just wasn't quite there. Like, it's not personal in the way that it feels when a rejection comes back and they're like, oh, they hated my story and I'm a bad writer and I'm going to go cry. Like, that's not what it is. It's that, you know, it's just competitive, and it just didn't work for us for whatever reason. It's like I said, it's not about the quality of your story. It's that it didn't work for that person at that magazine. So reading Slush is really good for that.
Yes, it's good for the ego also, in this sense. You know, you're like, okay, it's not about me, you know.
Right.
There's more.
No, I still cry, but, you know, it should be good for your ego.
And everybody has the right to, you know, be pissed off or be sad.
Yeah.
But then just, you know,
you cry and then you send it back out. Yep.
Yeah.
And Rebecca, we'd like to know if you send personal rejections, if it's a thing for you, and also how should writers take personal rejections? Because sometimes we see people saying things like, okay, it makes no sense, this personal rejection, or what the hell is he talking about, or is she talking about, or are they talking about? So do you send personal rejections, and how should writers react to that?
I do send personal rejections, but this is just me. I don't like to send criticism unless I have something, like Leslie for the rewrites, unless I have something very clear that I can say, you know, Henry on page 3 said something that didn't make sense to me for his character, and it threw me out of the story. Unless I can say something really specific, like, you know, your world building didn't bring the world to life for me, then I don't. What I do like to do, and what's really important to me as an editor to do, and that I spend too much time doing every month, is that I like to tell what I liked about it. Like, we loved your world building, but the rest just didn't work for us. Or we loved this character, but unfortunately we have to return it. So I really try, because rejections suck. And I am a writer, and I understand how hard that is. And we need our confidence in order to be brave enough to tell our stories. I try to send positive personal rejections. And I only send, like, constructive criticism rejections when I have a very clear feedback to give. As for how writers should take personal rejections, if you don't think that the feedback makes sense, ignore it. And if you disagree with the editor, ignore them. And if somebody critiques your story, and it doesn't matter if it's me or Neil Clark or Brandon Sanderson, and they say something and you disagree with it, ignore it. Like, this is subjective, and you are the person who's telling your story. Now, that can be taken too far, and we can get too arrogant about it, and we do need to be willing to listen to grow. It is a craft as well as an art, but, you know, at the end of the day, you're the only person who has the right to make changes to your story, and your opinion matters most. So that goes for critiques and personal rejections from editors. If you disagree, throw it in the trash.
That's very good. This is hard. This is a hard kind of like balance you need to do, but I think this is why you should say things and wait for personal rejections, and because this is something that we couldn't like, nobody can teach other people how to deal with that, right? Mm-hmm. It's just like think about how you feel, and just protect your mm-hmm. position, but also be flexible to see, oh yes, this is a good point, I didn't think about it, and this is right. Something I like it.
Right. So if it resonates, keep it, right? If you go, oh, that makes sense. Yes, I can see that my character didn't make sense when they did that, or that the world building, great, use it. But if it's not useful to you, don't, use it to wipe your tears and then throw it away.
You can cry while you are also
exactly.
Away. You just feel free.
Totally fine. Yeah.
We have, as I told here in the chat, we have a couple more questions here, but if you have any question that Rebecca didn't answer, just type in the chat. But okay, Rebecca, we have like 2 questions that are like maybe the questions that you used to receive the most, maybe. But I think it's important, especially because people here are probably, we really hope so, sending things to the Apex contest and to Apex original regular window. The first thing is, what is your wish list, if you have one? And we'd like to reinforce again what you said that Apex is looking for, like the 4 things that you want to have in the stories. And if you have a personal wish list, any, I don't know, specific POV, focus on anything, or even types of stories, or I like fairy tale, I like whatever, just share with us, because I think it's interesting.
So the wish list question is one that I get a lot, and it's tricky because the Flash Fiction Contest is themed. And so each month I might have a wish list. Like for necromancy, I didn't really have anything that I was looking for, but what was it? When we did Footsteps in the Forest, I was kind of hoping for like a creepy, moody, like forest story. But then I picked a desert story. So the wish list, if I were even able to give you one every month, wouldn't be worth the paper that it was written on. It can go in the trash next to the personal rejections. That being said, what I always want the stories that win to do, and the stories that tend to do best at the contest, are the ones that surprise me, that they're doing something with the theme that I would not have thought of. The winning necromancy story is fairly straightforward as far as what it did with necromancy, but it did it in such a beautiful, heart-wrenching way. If you're on the Patreon, you get to read it in 6 days, and it is a beautiful story. But what I'm looking for is to be surprised by what the use of the theme was. Because it's themed, that's the element that we really want to like sing and stand out. And so that's my wish list every month, is do something with this theme that nobody else did. And so I'm going, oh wow, I never would have done that with, what is it this month? It is botanist, right? So it would surprise me if the winning story is a person growing plants, right? It's going to be somebody who does something creative and unique with that theme. Now, if you're writing a story about a person growing plants, I'm not saying don't send it in, because you might surprise me with how you do that, right? The necromancy theme, it's a person bringing a person back to life. But the way that they use that theme was so beautiful that it ended up winning. And so, but it, with don't do the obvious thing if you can help it. And if you do the obvious thing, make sure you're doing that for a really good reason, that is you're using that obvious take on the story to do something creative with it. That's what I'm looking for. As for Apex in general, that's such a hard thing, because we're such a weird kind of semi-literary speculative market. Like it's you have to read Apex to really understand it. But the tagline, strange, surreal, shocking, and beautiful, you want to be able to check a few of those boxes. Apex stories may not be all of those, but they are always at least 1 or 2 of those. They're always a little bit strange, I think. They're not just straightforward stories. I know that Leslie has said she doesn't really like secondary world fantasy. We've published some of it, but it has to be really strange for Leslie to fall in love with a secondary world fantasy. I absolutely love epistolary fiction. I love well done epistolary where it's doing something like a letter or an email or a travel brochure or, the coronal sectioning story where it's, instruction document. That being said, epistolary is really hard to get wrong, because if you slip out of that epistolary voice for even a minute, then you've broken the magic. And so I love epistolary fiction. And if you send me good epistolary fiction, I'll probably snap it up, but it's really hard to get it wrong. So, caveat, I guess.
Yeah, that's very good. I want to just reinforce, we talked a lot about it in our writing group, like about, again, going to the low-hanging fruit, not going for the first ideas that you have. We did like a very nice exercise. About botanists, like the team, we talked about like connecting ideas and going further, and I don't know, I don't want to say anything here because many people had like nice ideas that they share with us, but like different POVs, different types of like takes from a subject is very nice. Also, I think we both, Diogo and I, like that. We really want to be surprised when you read like a story for Fantástico Guia submission window. And there's Altamar is saying something here that he would like the link for the recommendations, the story that we recommended. And Rebecca is going to send the presentation. Is it okay to share the presentation, or would you prefer that I list all the recommendations and send to people? Both.
You can share the PDF of the presentation with your members. I would rather not be posted publicly at all. But yeah, and then the presentation will include the titles of the stories. I can probably, I don't know if the PDF will link them. I'll have to check. If it doesn't, then I'll just send you the link separately.
But it's not a problem. We can also search for links.
Yeah. Most of them are on the Patreon, and then there's the 2 flash fiction pieces on the website.
Okay, perfect. So Altamar, we're going to have like Altamar is part of our writing group, so we have the PDF and also the links. Maybe we'll talk about a couple of them during the next next meetings, because I think it can bring us a lot of good things, good insights about things. And I know that many people in our group are planning to write for the botanist
Yay
window. So yeah,
I look forward to that.
Yeah, I just want to, before going to the maybe last question here, I would like to reinforce the thing about reading the market, like knowing the market. There is an expression in English that I don't think there is a equivalent in Portuguese, but it's like crack the market. And in the beginning, it can be a little bit like, should I adapt what I write to a magazine that I want to submit? And I think this is not a point. This is more about, of course, looking for, because if you want to send something to a magazine, you probably like that magazine as a reader. So you're not going to, write things that you don't want or you don't like to fit in a magazine. Doesn't make sense. But it's very nice to look for those things that, I think this editor may like. When we are sending our stories around, Diogo and I, we are all the time, like, Diogo send a story to me, and I say, Diogo, this story, Neil Clark probably is going to like it, because there's this and this and this that I used to see in stories like that Clark's Word used to publish.
Right.
So this is very important. Please read these stories.
Please do.
Because this is the main purpose for every, for everything.
That's what got us all here, was reading. So
yes, exactly. You're enjoying things. You want to be part of something that you already enjoy. It doesn't make sense to looking, in another angle. And also, if you want to, we also talk about it in the writing group. Read as with a extra layer of technique, looking for technique, and looking for things that are, standing out and etc. So I think this is very, very interesting. But it's also very good to listen somebody from the magazine saying those things aloud, and read. Many magazines have like a wish list in their submission guidelines. So this is thing this is something really important to do. And we, even for everybody here, both people from our writing group and who are not, just do that. I think this is the main thing that we could reinforce.
And Rebecca, we do have many Brazilian writers who are planning on submitting for the very first time. So we'd like to know if there's anything that writers should avoid doing in terms of writing, in terms of behavior, also in terms of cover letter. Is there a no-go? Is there anything that we should really avoid doing?
Good.
As far as the writing goes, I don't like giving any kind of like don't do that advice, because if you do it well, you can make anything work, right? So as far as the writing goes, just trust yourself, read a lot, write a lot. Cover letters don't matter. Just don't be weird, basically, is the only feedback. Like, you go to writing conferences, people always ask agents, like, what should writers do? And this always asks this kind of like, and again and again, the only thing agents are saying is like, just don't be weird. Like, don't send me emails to my personal email address asking me if I've read your story yet. Like, just don't be weird. And that's pretty much just, remember, this is a business as well as an art. And because it's such a personal art, because we're putting like chunks of, yes, please don't threaten me, because we're putting chunks of our souls on the page, it can feel so intensely personal that we forget that this is also a business, and that I'm doing a job, and that you're also supposed to be a professional on the other side of that. And if you just keep that in mind, that this is a business as well as an art, which is really hard. Like we said, like, have your cry in private and then move on. Something that writers like to do, and it's not like, this isn't like a red mark against you, but it's not necessary, is replying to rejections. I get so many emails, and it's fine. I'm never going to be like, oh, Diogo sent me a thank you for my rejection last month, I'm rejecting him for, like, it's not like that. But it's like, I just glance at it and archive it, and you're just, it's just one more thing that I have to deal with, and it's not necessary at all. Like, I understand that you're grateful for my time, or I assume that you are, and that we can all just move on. You don't need to reply to rejections. So yeah.
This is a very good thing to say, because I think this is very that's very cultural, and because here we tend to, people answer our rejection in a very enthusiastic way, like,
yeah,
oh my god, thank you very much.
Yeah.
You're saying good things about our story. This is the first time I've seen this story, and I love your magazine, and you're amazing. And then, or sometimes like, oh, I'm like in a very hard month, and I wrote to the writing, like, help me to get better, thank you. And we are like always replying to those answers to the rejections. But every time we talk about people wanting to send to anglophone market, we say, just don't.
Right.
Because it's like 1,000.
It's a cultural thing.
Yeah, this is a cultural thing. And also, I think it's in terms of like amount of things.
Yeah, quantity. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So this is a good thing to hear from another editor. We say that all the time. Diogo and I, we teach a workshop. We did a couple of times at Karen West about writing in English for non-native English speakers, and we always say those
don't
things.
Reply to rejections.
Yes, we already heard like from people from other countries who also, oh, that's good to know, because otherwise I would answer.
Yeah, like I said, I'm never gonna get mad about it. I don't. It doesn't offend me. I'm just saying it's unnecessary, and I'm always just like, archive, because I'm like doing 13 other things, so.
Yeah, exactly. But Fer just said something in the chat that's really real. Brazilians are always thankful and sorry for about something, So
okay, I'll keep that in mind when I'm sending you guys rejections.
Any passionate like answer to a rejection letter. It's not somebody like really freak, but it's like some future stuff. But I think that's it. Rebecca, thank you very, very, very much for being here. We know that like your time is very valuable, and also we want to thank everybody who is here, like also watching us, because as we told you, it's like we are in the middle of a holiday. It's Saturday morning, so people who are here probably we see many people here that are in the writing group also, and we know they are wanting to send things to the anglophone market, also to Fantástico Guia. I see also a lot of people who I know that are like struggling to send things to the anglophone market. So thank you, guys. This conversation is going to be recorded, like it is being recorded right now. We are going to share that in our YouTube channel. Rebecca, we're going to share the link with you if you want to share that with like Apex's audience.
Supporters also.
Yeah.
Yes, authors. Yes, I think this is very useful to everybody who are like writing and submitting stories in English. It was really amazing. As we told you before the talk, we are going to open an open channel there in our Discord server, only in English. And you feel free to join whatever and whenever you have some time, whenever you want. Don't feel, compelled to be there. Just be there if you want. If somebody has a specific doubt or a specific question, you can tag Rebecca after she joined the server. But of course, don't be like freaks. Like,
don't be weird. Yeah.
Don't be weird.
Don't be weird.
Don't tag her to ask if she already read your story that you submitted. Please don't do that. But thank you for like being so kind to be here and also to share your experience. I think we learned a lot, both as editors, writers, whatever. And we want to also invite people who are here and who are not in our writing group to be part of a writing group. We can share the link afterwards. If you go in our website, fantasticoguia.com.br, you can see the link there to a form where you can subscribe or subscribe yourself to our group. And to our like students here, we are going to have a very nice 1 hour long conversation about everything that we talked about now. I think that's it. Diogo, do you want to?
Rebecca, it was amazing. Thank you very much. We really appreciate you being here. And we'll give you also some time to say goodbye to our friends.
Yes.
I just wanted to say thank you for inviting me. It was such an honor, and I was super excited to come and talk about flash fiction. And I look forward to reading from all of you. Thank you for being here. I hope that what I said was helpful. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm grateful for the opportunity to chat with you all, and I look forward to doing so on the Discord. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Rebecca. We are going to have like this our teaching group right now, but after that, I'm sending you an email with like the link for the server, etc., and we can keep talking. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you guys all so much for having me. Have a great day.
Nice Saturday. Bye bye.
Bye bye, guys.
Bye bye. Thank you.